The alarm hit before I even opened my eyes. Red light pulsed across the ceiling of my bunk, and a voice crackled through the ship, calling every soldier to the deck. I was awake in seconds, boots on, heart already pounding, because that particular alarm only meant one thing. Someone out there was dying, and we were the only ones close enough to stop it. My name is Daniel Cole, and I served on a coalition ship called the Horizon, one of the few vessels in our fleet crewed mostly by humans. We were not the most respected soldiers among the stars. Most of the older species saw us as loud, reckless, and far too willing to fight. But when the distress call came from a planet called Vaith, we were the ones who answered first. The call came from a species named the Vethrai, gentle beings who built their cities on peace and negotiation, not war. Their world had been invaded by an empire called the Skarn Dominion, a force that swept through weaker worlds and crushed anyone who resisted. The Vethrai never expected to fight. They had no army worth mentioning. All they had was a plea sent out into the dark, begging for someone, anyone, to save them. They did not want us. I found that out the moment we entered orbit. A Vethrai official named Solon K contacted our ship, her voice sharp with disappointment. She said they had hoped for a coalition response team, not humans. She said our reputation frightened her people more than the invaders did. I remember standing on the bridge, jaw tight, listening to her explain that humanity was known across known space for one thing: violence that never seemed to end once it started. I did not argue with her. There was no time. Below us, the Skarn fleet was already entering the system, and the Vethrai had less than an hour before their cities would be under direct assault. I gathered my team in the launch bay. Ellie Marsh checked her rifle with steady hands, her face calm the way it always was before a fight. Next to her stood Nathan Hale, quiet, watching the display of incoming enemy ships with narrowed eyes. Behind them was Priya Anand, our medic, already running through supply checks without being told. We had trained together for years. We trusted each other with our lives, and that trust was about to be tested in front of an audience that did not want us there. Our orders were simple: protect the civilians, do whatever it takes. The Skarn ships dropped out of warp in a tight formation, dark and angular, built for intimidation as much as war. Their commander, a being named Draeth, opened a channel to gloat before the battle even began. He told us the Vethrai were already lost, that resistance from soft-hearted rescuers would only delay the inevitable. He expected us to retreat once the numbers turned against us. That was the mistake every enemy made when they faced humanity for the first time. They thought fear would stop us. It never did. Our ship engaged the first wave of enemy fighters, while our shuttle broke off toward the surface, carrying my team down into the heart of the capital city. Vethrai buildings rose around us like glass flowers, beautiful and completely undefended. Civilians ran through the streets, confused, terrified, looking to the sky as explosions lit up the orbit above them. We landed near a shelter packed with families, and it was clear within seconds that the Skarn ground forces were already moving toward it. Nathan took point, guiding people inside while Ellie and I set up a defense line at the entrance. Priya worked fast, treating anyone who came through injured, never stopping, never slowing down. The first wave of Skarn soldiers arrived faster than expected, and Ellie and I held the line long enough for the last of the civilians to get inside. My hands were steady, my mind clear, focused only on the mission. This was not about proving anything to the Vethrai or living up to any reputation. It was about the families huddled behind us, trusting strangers from another world to keep them alive. The fighting outside the shelter did not last long, but it was intense enough that by the end of it, Solon K herself came to see what had happened. She stood at the entrance, staring at the barricade we built out of broken transport crates, at the wounded Skarn soldiers now restrained rather than killed, at the families safely gathered inside. Her expression shifted from doubt to something closer to disbelief. She asked me why we did not simply retreat when the numbers were against us. I told her the truth. Retreating was never part of the plan. Humanity does not calculate the odds before deciding whether people deserve to be saved. That answer seemed to unsettle her more than comfort her, but there was no time to explain further. A larger Skarn force was already regrouping outside the city, preparing a full assault meant to break through every line of defense at once. Word came down from our ship that the coalition allies stationed nearby were hesitating, unwilling to commit their forces until they understood the full strength of the enemy. That kind of caution made sense to them. It made no sense to us. I gathered my team again, along with a handful of HFY volunteers who had picked up weapons for the first time in their lives. They were frightened, but they refused to hide while their world burned. I respected that more than I could say. We moved through the city, setting traps in narrow streets, using the terrain the Skarn had underestimated because they assumed a civilization without an army would also be a civilization without cleverness. The HFY knew every alley, every rooftop, every hidden passage beneath their glass towers. Combined with human tactics built on adaptability rather than brute strength, we turned their home into a battlefield the Skarn were not prepared for. Dreyeth's forces pushed harder, frustrated by the resistance. His soldiers, trained only to fight enemies who followed predictable patterns, found themselves facing an enemy who changed strategy every few minutes. Ellie led one team through the eastern district, drawing a large group of Skarn soldiers away from the shelters. Nathan took position on a rooftop, guiding our movements with calm, clear instructions. Priya treated the wounded in real time, moving between makeshift stations without ever stopping. I stayed near the center of the fighting, coordinating everyone, watching the battle shift in our favor step by step. It was not easy. It was not safe, but it was working. The turning point came when Dreyeth himself led a strike toward the central shelter, believing that removing the largest group of civilians in one decisive blow would break our resolve. He was wrong. When his forces arrived, they found the shelter empty. The families already moved through tunnels the HFY volunteers had guided them through hours earlier. Instead, his soldiers found me, Ellie, and Nathan waiting for them, along with a wall of barricades reinforced by anything the city could offer. The confrontation was brief, but decisive. Dreyeth's forces, expecting to overwhelm a handful of defenders, instead found themselves caught between narrow streets and a defense line that refused to break. When the dust settled, Dreyeth ordered a retreat, unwilling to lose more soldiers to an enemy who fought without hesitation and without fear. The remaining Skarn fleet withdrew from orbit less than an hour later, unwilling to continue an invasion that had already cost them far more than expected. The HFY capital stood, scarred but alive, its people gathering in the streets to see the sky clear for the first time in a day that had felt endless. Solon K found me near the central plaza, where families were reuniting, where children ran freely again without fear of the sky above them. She looked at me for a long moment before speaking. She admitted that her people had misjudged us. They expected saviors who would negotiate, who would offer comfort and diplomacy. Instead, they received something else entirely, something that frightened them at first, but ultimately saved everything they loved. I told her humanity never claimed to be gentle. We only claimed to show up when it mattered, and to stay until the fighting was over. She asked if we would remain to help rebuild. I said yes, without hesitation, because that was always part of who we were. Fighting was never the goal. It was simply what stood between the people who needed help and the people willing to give it. As the sun set over Vaith, painting the glass towers in soft gold light, I stood with my team, watching a world that had almost been lost, now filled with quiet relief. Ellie leaned against a barricade, exhausted but smiling. Nathan finally set his rifle down, watching children play in the street below. Priya moved among the wounded, offering comfort now instead of urgent care. I thought about what Solon K said earlier, about how the galaxy saw humanity as something to fear. Maybe that reputation was not entirely wrong. Maybe we were louder, more stubborn, more willing to run toward danger than any other species out there. But standing in that plaza, surrounded by people who were alive because we refused to walk away, I understood something clearly for the first time. The galaxy did not need more diplomats offering careful words while worlds burned. It needed people willing to stand in the fire itself, to bleed if necessary, to hold the line until the danger passed. Earth did not send comfort to Vaith that day. It sent warriors, and in the end, that was exactly what saved them. As we prepared to leave the plaza, Solon K placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture I later learned was reserved only for those the HFY considered family. She said her people would never forget what humanity did for them, not because we were gentle, but because we were exactly what they needed, when gentleness alone could not save them. I looked out over the city, alive and rebuilding, and knew we would answer the call again if another world ever needed us. That was who we were. Not the polished heroes of old stories, but the ones who showed up when it mattered most, and who never left until the people who begged for mercy were finally safe.